So the only reason that the ruins of ancient Alexandria aren't considered the best archaeological site on the planet is because Alexandria was so wealthy, so rich, so coveted in the ancient world, and it's set right in the center of all of the major trade routes throughout the Mediterranean, all the way through Africa and India, that the amount of times that it was ransacked, burned, even sunken, destroyed, and then built on top of really eclipses anywhere else in the ancient world. There is no other place that was as ransacked in ancient times as Alexandria. If you were able to go back in time through ancient Egypt, you would never find a city as grand and as welcoming as Alexandria. You have to realize that the ancient Egyptians prioritized temples, tombs, and palaces. This is really where all of the money, all of the wealth, all of the energy, the megalithic and impressive stone masonry went in Egypt. It didn't really go to the normal person's house. Most of the towns in Egypt that were built around the temple that's set in the middle of town were really just crude brick and mortar constructions, and the streets were really just dusty streets. They were not paved. The only places that you see that luxurious, beautiful, timeless, just elegant construction is at the temples, the tombs, and the palaces that would sit on the countryside, where the noblemen, people of the royal family, perhaps even priests later on in Egypt, or maybe even the pharaoh himself, would have houses out in the country far away from everybody. And honestly, this was nothing out of the ordinary. Most places in the ancient world were like this, but Alexandria was something different. Alexander the Great designed the city to be a beacon of light on the Mediterranean, a melting pot of cultures, a place of refuge with wide open cobblestone streets, allowing the sea breeze to sweep through the city. And when the Ptolemies took over their reign of Alexandria after Alexander's death, they expanded upon Alexander's ideas and probably made the city just as, or maybe even more grand than Alexander ever imagined it could be. They erected Alexander's mausoleum, the library and museum of Alexandria, one of the world's first universities, in fact. They built a lighthouse that was the same height as the Great Pyramid to guide ships into the port at night. Huge colossi statues stood as guardians in front of the lighthouse and temples, and nearly all of the city was built in stone. Every street was paved, and the apartment buildings where citizens lived were built in stone. And this was much unlike most cities throughout the ancient world, say ancient Rome, that was built almost entirely out of wood, at least up until the reign of the Emperor Augustus. And there's a common funny saying, and it may very well be true, that at any point during Rome's thousand-year history, some part of ancient Rome was always on fire because of how many buildings were built primarily out of wood. But Alexandria, that wasn't the case. Most of the buildings around the city, not just including its main monuments that we've all heard of today, but even the apartment buildings where your ordinary citizens lived, were built in stone. So when something caught fire, the entire city didn't burn down. When Alexandria burned down, it was under siege, it was under attack. And its architecture combined elements of Greek and Egyptian architectural styles. And this is actually the architecture that inspired the way we view iconic ancient Rome today. And the way this happened was when Rome's first emperor, Augustus, when he was only Octavian before he became emperor, he arrived in Alexandria around 30 BC, and he was so impressed with Alexandria's architecture as compared to Rome, which was really just a city of crude mud brick constructions. He went home and essentially revolutionized the architectural style in Rome. And he has a famous saying that he says when he was born, or when he came to Rome, it was a city of mud brick, but he leaves it a city of marble. So Alexandria is really what inspired ancient Rome to be as elegant and timeless and beautiful as it was. And over the course of the last 2,300 years, most of Alexandria has been either destroyed, burned down, swept away in a tsunami in 365 AD, sunken, or buried. But there are still glimpses of Alexandria that can be seen today, including part of Alexandria's scholarly campus that most people have never even seen or heard of. So in today's video, we are diving into the lost ruins of Alexandria's library. Okay, so I am really excited about this. For years now, I've been wanting to know what my DNA percentage results would be. I know my family's history going back through the late 1800s pretty well, but anything before that, it gets pretty fuzzy. And so to get my DNA results, I actually partnered with MyHeritage. They sent me a DNA test kit, and taking the test was actually super easy. I just swabbed my cheeks for a couple of minutes, and the results that we're about to see cover more regions than any other test. It'll give me a percentage breakdown of my origins across 42 different supported ethnicities and over 2,000 geographic regions. It'll also help me find new relatives I didn't even know I had based on the DNA results. All right, it says, Luke, ready to explore your ethnicity? This is crazy. I'm kind of nervous here. This is my first time seeing this. Luke, you are 38.2% English. Wow. So I knew I had a lot of English in me. 35.9% Scottish and Welsh. Wow, that is crazy. 6.7% Dutch. That's insane. 6.3% Danish. Man, I'm as European as it gets. And 12.9% 4 more ethnicities. Wow, I actually see Ireland on there. All right, so estimated, I am 5.4% Irish, 3.7% Breton, 2.1% French, and 1.7% Germanic. I wish I could talk to those people. Another thing that's interesting is to think about all of my 70% of me that is English and Scottish. All of my ancestors who must have lived during medieval times and seen a lot of incredible things. I love the story of Henry V. I find that period of European, English, United UK history to be just absolutely incredibly fascinating. And now that I know that I had ancestors living during those periods, it's kind of overwhelming, and it's kind of sad that I don't get to talk to those people. But now I feel connected to them, and when I watch movies or play games like Kingdom Come about that time period, I'm going to feel quite a bit more connected to my ancestors. This is really, really cool. And just for you guys watching, MyHeritage is running a special promotion where you can get your very own DNA kit for just $29, £29, or €29 by using code Luke29 at checkout. This is significantly lower than any other option. Again, that's your very own DNA kit for $29, £29, or €29 by using code Luke29 at checkout. MyHeritage is committed in its privacy policy to never sell or license genetic data. So get your DNA test kit today by clicking the link in the bio or scanning the QR code on screen, and finally find out your origins and DNA percentage results. Thank you to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the show. Okay, so when people think of the fall of ancient Egypt, they tend to think about the death of Cleopatra in around 30 BC. Rome comes in and takes over Egypt, and it feels like the history of ancient Egypt essentially ends then, but it really doesn't. And people who lived in ancient Egypt during that time did not really view it that way either. Egypt had already not had an Egyptian pharaoh for hundreds and hundreds of years, nearly 1,000 years by this point. And after Cleopatra died, the people of Alexandria were given a year of mourning before Augustus, Rome's newest and actually first emperor, was then introduced as the pharaoh of Egypt. And ancient Egypt, business as usual, actually continued for about 300 more years, around maybe 350 years, I should say, with every single pharaoh just ruling from Rome, a few coming and actually visiting Egypt and exploring this ancient land. But throughout ancient Egypt, the emperor of Rome was still revered as the actual Egyptian pharaoh. And you can see Egyptian Roman pharaohs carved into temple walls all across from North Egypt all the way down to South Egypt. Even the most obscure Roman emperor pharaohs in the most obscure ancient Egyptian cities, such as in the Dakhla Oasis, which is the most remote place other than where the Oracle of Siwa is at. Even there, we see inscriptions of Roman emperors who only reigned for just a few months being put on the walls there and revered as the pharaoh of Egypt. So I say all this to say, after the death of Cleopatra, it was business as usual. Ancient Egypt did not end. It kept going for another 300 years until the rise of Christianity and the shutting down of all the pagan and Egyptian temples. And this is something very important to know, because after the fall of Cleopatra, there is still more to be studied in the Egyptian world and in the Alexandrian world as well. So about a year ago, I arrived in Alexandria. I woke up in the morning at my seaside hotel, and I walked a few blocks to an archaeological site named Kom El Dikka to meet my friend Tolden Stone, who some of you guys may know as a Roman historian here on YouTube. And I walked in, and I was blown away at an archaeological site that I'd never seen before. Below me, as I walked in, was a huge open auditorium, Greco-Roman style theater with a larger theater or auditorium sitting across from it, with this long walkway and these lecture halls that went off to the side. And as you walk down this long, what was definitely a covered walkway with these megalithic solid granite pillars toppled over and lining the sides, I turned around and I saw these huge pillars lining, and at the end of that was my friend Tolden Stone. We took a walk around, and there was a Roman bath. There were more lecture halls. As you walked around the corner of the Roman bath, you walked into an ancient Greek and Roman apartment complex with another Greek house that actually still had the tiles, the mosaic tiles on the floor. You walk around another bathhouse and then down towards the auditorium again. And I realized that this was an archaeological site unlike anything else that I had seen in Egypt before. Most archaeological sites all throughout Egypt are just a couple of things. You never get to see somebody's house. You never get to see a palace. All of these things were ransacked, destroyed, built over, buried in the earth. They're gone today. The only things you will actually see when traveling around Egypt are temples and tombs. Those are the only things that survive. They're on the west side of the Nile. All the homes that would have been on the east side of the Nile, none of it exists anymore. It was all ransacked in ancient times. I mean, even before late antiquity. But here at Kom El Dikka, you actually get to stand in the center of town. This is where normal people who just fade into history as soon as they die spent all of their time. Go to hang out at the Roman bath, hang out with their friends, go catch a lecture in one of the small lecture halls, go see a play in the auditorium, go hear a bigger lecture at one of the larger lecture halls. It's just very interesting. And right around the corner, you have a small apartment complex. And I think about someone who could have lived in this apartment complex, and they have to walk through this meandering, labyrinthine city to get to the next place. When we think of ancient cities, we often think of a little bit of distance between them, kind of how we are in the modern world. To get from one location to another, really, most of us have to drive. But if you live in a city, you have to take a little bit of a walk. Sometimes there's a bit of separation. But in the ancient world, think of it as New York City, but even more compact, like a beehive of activity. When you walked outside of the front door of your apartment complex, there was maybe a 5-foot alley there. And you look up, there is no sunshine because the buildings are so tall. In ancient Alexandria, the buildings could be up to 6 floors tall. And so next to this apartment complex that's probably several floors tall, and this Roman bath that's right next to you, you have a 5-foot alleyway, and there's no sun coming into this alleyway. So you're walking through this labyrinth that's probably packed with people until you get to this open, covered hallway that's lined with these megalithic red granite columns holding up this huge 25-foot tall ceiling. And you walk around this alleyway, and then you see people coming in and out of the Roman bath that's to your right. You turn left, and there are all these lecture halls of people coming and going, learning about mathematics, philosophy, history, science, astronomy. I mean, it goes on and on. And then you have a larger auditorium, possibly where a play is going on. And this is just one tiny, tiny sliver of ancient Alexandria that most people have never even seen before. And certainly, students and scholars who worked at and studied at the Library of Alexandria spent an incredible amount of time here. And this is just an extended campus of Alexandria's library. This is not, it's not a separate institution. It is just a continuation of it. And I believe very, very likely that one of these large walkways, these covered walking paths that you see at Kom El Dikka, if you draw a straight line, you could probably end up at the Library of Alexandria. The north-south path seems to go straight out to the port, which I think is probably the likely area. It would have led straight to Alexandria's library, or Alexandria's library probably connected to that ancient road at one point in time. Now, the west-east road, there's something interesting about this as well, because the El Shalalat South Park that's in Alexandria, that exact GPS coordinate is the most prominent and thought location of the former Library of Alexandria. So either way you draw a direct line on either one of those roads, it leads to two places that very likely the library once set. So this excavated sliver of ancient Alexandria gives us an idea of what life was like in the first centuries after the Roman conquest. When we think of the ancient bathhouse, the theaters, lecture halls, and apartment buildings, we naturally imagine a bit of space between these places. But you should think of ancient cities as being, again, much more like a compact New York City, except even more crammed and much less organized, or at least organized in any kind of traditional or contemporary sense that would make sense to us. When you walk through Kom El Dikka, you realize that the theater shared a wall with the lecturers. The lecture halls were connected to the bathhouse, and on the other side of the bathhouse was a collection of apartment buildings. Running through the center of it was this huge paved and covered walking path with tight alleyways branching off between the buildings. You really get a sense that this city was not only grand and enormous, but also dense, dark, tightly packed, that had this underbelly or this underworld to it. It was an endless labyrinth, a beehive of activity. You can see in these reconstructions that these are actually closed dome roofs, so you have to imagine candles sitting upon the wall, or people walking through with the little terracotta lamps with their scrolls, and walking out into this open covered walkway, and walking half a mile north towards the coastline to go back to the library after listening to a lecture and hanging out with your friends in the lecture halls, or going to the Roman baths. It must have just been a completely magical place to have been. Ancient Alexandria really was the jewel of the ancient world. It was the light of the ancient world. There was nothing else like it. It was, even though Alexander conquered the world's greatest empire at 25 years old, his greatest achievement was founding the city of Alexandria. In the next 500 to 600 years of that city's reign, even during the Roman conquest. Again, with the fall of Egypt and Cleopatra in 30 BC, we think of that as the end, but no. Egypt went on for business as usual for another 350 years, and so did the city of Alexandria. The scholars of Alexandria never stopped. The study in Alexandria's library never ended. The lighthouse was still standing. The museum was still there. The Serapeum of Alexandria with its own library and all these labyrinthine tunnels underneath the temple were still there. Everything went on as usual, just with more Romans and more Roman culture in the area. But the core tenets of Alexandrian society were still very, very much in place. And so when you go to Alexandria, Egypt someday, whether you come with me or go on your own, you have to see Kom El Dikka. It is the most unique archaeological site across all of ancient Egypt, and maybe one of the most unique archaeological sites in the entire world, because even in the Americas, as well as every other place I've been around the Mediterranean, I cannot think of an archaeological site that gives you so much of a slice of life of the normal people who lived in an ancient city. Again, most of the time, you get the temples, you get the large palaces, like you go to Greece and you get the Parthenon that's built by Pericles, and all of the other temples there that were built by the tyrants and the government of Athens. But you don't get to walk around Athens' neighborhood. You don't get to see where normal people lived. But here at Kom El Dikka, you get a slice of normal life in the ancient world. And I think that's the thing that I love the most about it. And just for you guys watching, MyHeritage is running a special promotion where you can get your very own DNA kit for just $29, 29 pounds, or 29 euros by using code Luke29 at checkout. This is significantly lower than any other option. Again, that's your very own DNA kit for $29, 29 pounds, or 29 euros by using code Luke29 at checkout. I'm Luke Caverns. If you'd like more videos on the history and mysteries of the ancient world, well, please like and subscribe for more.